Hello, guys. Once again, same as last time, if you would do me a favor and please type something in the chat box, your name will pop up. But if you want to just type your name and tell me that you're here so I can make sure I get credit for everybody who is watching at this moment. As usual, a few things I want to mention before I get into the actual review, and I'll go over all of the bold words essentially in your chapter and take any questions if you have them. First, as always, your quiz opens after your quiz is actually already open, but you can go ahead and take the quiz after this is done. But it does close tonight, same as last time. It is due today, so you do need to make sure that the quiz is done before midnight. It is timed, and it is also a much longer quiz. Well, I don't know if I'm going to say much longer. It's definitely longer than your previous quizzes. I think this one's 37 minutes. But still the same format, just one SAQ, not more than that. I am going to change how, starting on this quiz, the way that the SAQs is going to be weighted is going to be a little bit different. And I'm changing that because of how I think that the AP exam is going to be just SAQs now. So I think that we need to push more towards those and focus more on those. So I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. And now, starting with this quiz, the SAQs now worth 12 points instead of 6. So I doubled the amount of points that the SAQ is worth. So I think it says it on there when you're answering the question, how many points the question is worth. So it should say 12 points. But other than that, that shouldn't really affect the way that you respond to the question. It should still be the same. Never give me less than, don't even give me one sentence per point. That's really lame and you won't do very well. It's hard to get full credit when you only give me one sentence. Make sure that you've done all of your work that's assigned before the quiz, before you take the quiz. I miss you guys too. I miss you too. Make sure you've done all of that work, because there is questions on the quiz that can pertain to the work. So if you haven't done all the work and you take the quiz, you're going to be in trouble. And speaking of work, most of you are still staying on pace, but I'm starting to see more people fall behind. I think now that we're in this like third week of this online stuff, people are starting to hit their like, I want to die. This is so boring. Like, I hate every minute of this. So in an effort to encourage you to not do that, or basically force you to not do that, starting next week, I'm going to go back to daily due dates. So I'll still post things way ahead of time. So like on Tuesday, you can probably see what's going to be assigned for Thursday, and you can go ahead and do it, but it will be due on Thursday if it's marked for Thursday. And if it's marked for Monday, it will be due on Monday. So I'm going to start doing that next week so that we don't keep falling behind. I think too many of us are spending too much time. I cannot post on Sunday. I will not post on Sunday. I will not post everything on Monday, but I will post what I have for Monday. You will always have whatever is due tomorrow available the day before. Typically speaking. But if it isn't, whatever, don't freak out. You should be really sticking with your same schedule. That's really the best way to make all of this successful for yourself. Like if you normally have AP Lit or Lang, it's Lang in the morning, work on English stuff from 7:50 to 9, or from 8 to 9:30, and then at 9:30 work on APUSH stuff, and then take a lunch break. And that way that you're keeping yourself with a routine, that will help like your mental stability, and it will also make sure that you don't like start to fall super behind. AP exam updates. Tonight at like 8:30 or something, it's like really late, it might be like 7, there's a live stream for AP teachers only with the vice president of College Board, Trevor Packer. And so we had to like register, like enter in all of this like top secret information and everything to get registered for the live stream. And he's going to be announcing what the rest of the changes are going to be before they're made public tomorrow. So I will probably take notes on what he says, and if there's like definitive things. If he's just talking broad issues, then I'm probably not going to give you a lot of information. I'm probably not going to email you tonight. But if he specifically says like, this exam is going to go like this exam is going to go like this, if he says like all the AP histories are going to be 4 SAQ questions or something like that, I will send it in an email and I will explain it. So if not, though, that information will be, if you don't get an email from me tonight, that information will be made public tomorrow. So just because you don't get an email from me tonight doesn't mean that you're going to be like left out of the loop. Same goes for AP English. All of that information is going to be made public. I think I mentioned this in the last live stream, but I'm going to mention it again. I know you know that the exam is online in only 45 minutes, but I talked to some seniors, not juniors, but some seniors who were confused about the AP changes, and they thought it was only going to be multiple choice, and I was like, no, it's just short answer. And they were like, no, that's just history. No, that's all the AP exams. All the AP exams are just free response now. There's no multiple choice offered on any AP exam at all. The only exception would be like the AP art classes, and that's because they have to submit a portfolio. They're not doing multiple choice still, so there's no more multiple choice. Speaking of keeping on track with your classes, if you're not keeping on track with your classes, and some of you probably already know this, if you're not keeping on track with, not just with my class, no one's really like turning in a lot of late work for me. Some of you are waiting to the last minute to do your work, but you're not necessarily turning in late. If you are not completing assignments on time, expect to be getting a call from Miss Keels, because she has access to everyone's Canvas. She's registered as a teacher to every class, and she is literally sitting at home and looking at every single person's, all of the classes that you're in, all of the assignments that you've done, looking when you logged on, how long you were logged on for. And if you are not logged on the way you're supposed to be, if you're not completing your assignments on time, she's going to be calling you. She's going to be calling your parents, and she's going to want to know why. So if you want to avoid that conversation, make sure that you're staying on top of your work. And that doesn't, like I said, that doesn't just go for my class. I don't know if she's called anyone about my class, but I know that she's called people about other classes. So make sure you're staying on top of that. Let me look at my list here. And last thing, the quiz that you took last week, I'll have that finished. Some of you already have grades for it. You see in Canvas. And the rest of you who don't have grades for it yet, I'm gonna grade that today. I'll finish those today. After I do a few other things. I have like 3 more video conferences today aside from this live stream. So it'll take me some time, but it will be done by sometime the end of the day today. All right, so that is all of the announcement related things that I have. If you have any questions before I start going over the actual chapter, go ahead and type them in now, and I'll wait and see if anybody's got any. Are we going to have any tests while on Canvas? Yep. Your unit tests or your period tests will be on there. When do we get yearbooks? I mean, I don't know. When are you going to be allowed out of the house? I'm not the governor. I have no idea. I mean, yearbooks are going to be delivered to the school on May the 2nd, but y'all are not going to have access to the school for at least quite a while. So I have no idea. Nah, beats me. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and get into the actual chapter review. Are we going to lose any summer? I doubt it. I mean, maybe like a few days of max. But I honestly doubt it, because you're still having school. You haven't really missed any days. And on top of that, it's a state of emergency. So had you missed some days, they could just absorb them. Have they figured out graduation? No. Since the stay-at-home order, I don't even know when our stay-at-home order is out, like our county one or our state one. But our graduation wasn't scheduled until after that. At that point, it's still May 22nd. It's still on the schedule for May 22nd, but they have a bunch of other things to do before rescheduling graduation. But I'm sure that they will reschedule it. Do you know anything about state exams? Still don't know nothing about state exams. Haven't heard. I think one of my conferences today is about is like a staff thing. So maybe I'll find out then. When I find something out about state exams, I'll definitely send it out. Never mind. I know you guys don't have one for me, but I'm sure you have one in other classes, pre-cal chemistry, whatever. So when I find something out about that, I'll definitely let you know. Anything else? All right, I'm going to, like I said, go through just the key terms that are in the book, which are pretty much in like chronological order as they go through your chapter. I don't know. I don't know about grades. I don't know if they'll be letters or numbers. I'm thinking they're numbers still. I think that they're just going to change the grading scale. Someone said all seniors get pass fail on their transcripts. Is this true? Well, that's what the bill says, but it doesn't direct us how it's supposed to work. So every county has to figure out how they want it to work on their own. And so our county is doing that right now. But y'all aren't seniors, so it doesn't matter to you. It doesn't pertain to you. Okay, so this chapter basically starts with Johnson when he takes office in, I guess at the end of 1963, beginning of 1964. Are all grades just going to be in Canvas? No, I'm not putting grades in Canvas. I mean, there are some things in Canvas, but Power School is a thing. We're just not allowed to put grades in Power School until they figure out how they want the grading scale to work. So when they figure that out, I'll take all of the things I've been writing down and put them in Power School. Canvas does not hold legitimate grades because you can't change the way that Canvas is weighted. So if I put in a quiz grade, a test grade, and a homework grade, it all ends up being weighted the same, which is not true. So so if you look at your grade on Canvas, that's not real. So I'm not worried about putting grades in Canvas. I'm not even trying to put grades in Canvas. Really, the only reason why your quiz grades are in Canvas is because when I grade the quiz, I have to do it physically on there because of the way that the software works. There's nothing for me to write on. But for your other assignments, I can just write down where your grades are. So don't worry about grades right now. No one's going to fail. No one's GPA is going to tank unless you just don't do your work. That's literally the only way that your GPA is going to tank during all of this is if you just literally sit at home and watch Tiger King on repeat, which I would highly recommend if no one's watching it. Carol definitely killed her husband. Any other questions before I finally get to this freaking chapter? I hope people are still watching the College Board review streams every day at 11. And the AP Lang one is every day at 3, I think. I think AP Lit is at noon and AP Lang is at 3. What is it I've been seeing everywhere? I don't know. Seniors are I don't know. Have you met our seniors? But all the ones that have asked me, I've explained to them, don't, pretty much just for future reference, don't trust anything that you're going to see somebody has screenshotted 7 different times and then re-uploaded onto Snapchat. 9 times out of 10, that's not actually news or is not pertaining full amounts of information. So if you have a question about something, feel free to ask me. But unless it actually pertains to you or is like a dire emergency, I ask that you not ask me because what does it matter? What does it matter? Even the seniors who are asking me, I'm like, shut up. What does it matter? We don't know anything right now. So when there is something to know, Ms. Kills will send it in an email or the superintendent will send it in an email. So until you get that, I did see a couple of people tell me that they saw the Roy Cooper's going to make everybody retake their current grade, but that was an April Fool's thing, so no one's having to retake it. What period are we learning up to? We're going to finish it. We're going to go to period 9. Why wouldn't we? We're almost done with period 8, honestly. And because we're honestly moving pretty fast, so I might move up your test. I think it's on the schedule right now for April. That's a very good April Fool's joke. Yeah, brownie points to Huxley's mom. That's hilarious. But don't stop asking me about IDs. I told you when I have something to say about IDs, I'll tell you. But what was I just about to say? I already forgot. Y'all already made me forget. I said I might move up your test. I think right now your test is on the schedule for the 13th, maybe something like that. But I don't think we need to take that long. I mean, like, honestly, like, we could finish this pretty soon. We only have like one more chapter, maybe two. I think just one more chapter after this chapter that you finish now, though. So we might just keep it rolling and move on. All right. Anyway, so back to Johnson. Here we go with review. Now, if you have non-review related questions, hold them to the end. Star Wars isn't news, and I mean, maybe we could do a pop culture moment, but don't hold your breath, Caleb. Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is, and all of these things are part of Johnson's like Great Society, which was his domestic policy to improve. Reagan Star Wars, period 9. All of his plans to like make society better, and we're gonna like be living in this new age of solving all of these problems, whether it be like poverty, education, whatever, access to healthcare. All of these things fall under the Great Society. So the Civil Rights Act is one, because being supportive of civil rights was part of the Great Society, which is why he also supported affirmative action and other civil rights legislation. But the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it officially ends segregation in all public places in the United States. So de jure segregation is ended with the Civil Rights Act. And it also requires fair hiring in all jobs. So if you remember, the executive order that FDR signed was fair hiring in government funded jobs. And it didn't require stop that. My dog is growling at like random noises. It didn't apply to all jobs that were even federally funded, just I think like wage workers. But now this applies to all jobs across the board, fair hiring. And then the other thing it does is it forms the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to like oversee the enforcement of fair hiring. Affirmative action talks about in your book. I don't remember if I talked about it in the notes video or whatever, but it's basically like an effort to encourage fair hiring, but also admission. So it applies to colleges, anything that you have to like apply for, whether it be job or an organization. Affirmative action applies to it, and it's like a system of policies and procedures that a company or a college or whoever puts in place to make race not a factor, or to establish some type of equity in terms of balancing out a racial disparity. It's not quotas. Quotas is the Philadelphia Plan, and that's under Nixon. And we don't do that anymore. And that was only for a brief time. And that's not what affirmative action is. Affirmative action is not like, oh, well, we need at least 1,000, Hispanic people, and we need at least 2,000 African-American people. That's not what affirmative action is. I can't give you, and there's no point in me giving you much more of a definition other than it's a list of policies and procedures that they'll put in place to prevent that from happening. Because after that, it gets very specific, and it just depends on the organization, whether it's a business or a school. But you can, if you're really, super interested in affirmative action, you can always Google more specifics about how individual groups apply affirmative action programs. The Great Society, I just explained, that was Johnson's domestic policy, essentially. That's what he was calling everything. And then the biggest piece of the Great Society was the war on poverty. That was what he spent the most, in terms of his entire presidency. Is going to put the most energy and effort into Vietnam, and then the war on poverty is going to be second. That's where he'll put the next most amount of energy and money is going to be into the war on poverty. The Freedom Summer was the SNCC program to get African Americans registered to vote in the state of Mississippi, because they had such large numbers of African Americans in Mississippi, and also such low numbers of them registered to vote. And so they got a lot of voter registration done. It attracted a lot of media attention, especially after the death of 3 of their volunteers from the North. And LBJ had to like send in federal marshals to like investigate the murder, and they did arrest some people, but nobody was really convicted. That's what I'm looking for. Convicted of murder or anything. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, though, was born out of the Freedom Summer, and I know I did explain this in your notes video, but when you and if you've pre-registered, you know, before you're 18, you can always pre-register to vote. If you have already pre-registered, then you know that when you register to vote, you can choose a political party affiliation or none at all. You can just be like not affiliated and be an independent. But if you want to join a political party and be a registered Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party member, whatever, then you can do that when you register to vote. And there were plenty of people, Black people in Mississippi, who, when they registered to vote during this whole campaign, were like, well, a lot of my beliefs align with the Democratic Party's values, but the Democratic Party of Mississippi is also one that supports segregation and racist policies. That's not what I want. I want to be associated with the, you know, the National Democratic Party. This isn't what I want. So they decided to make their own Democratic Party that they called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, but it was never recognized as like the official Democratic Party of Mississippi. Selma, you watched the Eyes on the Prize thing about that last week, and you saw the actual footage and everything of them crossing the bridge and Bloody Sunday and all of that. When they finally marched from Selma to Montgomery, after the Selma March is what they passed those last two pieces of legislation to help with voting equity, and they were the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So don't confuse the 64 and 65 civil rights and voting rights. And that banned literacy tests. And then the 24th Amendment, which banned poll taxes. So those are the two things that we'll get after Selma to accomplish voter registration. And after segregation ended and after they fix voter registration, the next major issue is going to be economic inequality. And we know that's not just in the South, that's across the board, but even more than in the South, it's in inner city neighborhoods and in urban areas where white flight has left urban and city locations like metropolitan areas with high amounts of people of color and in high poverty rates in areas. And so that's when we start to see the civil rights movement getting more into like West Coast and Midwest cities and Northeast cities instead of just the South. Like for so long, the civil rights movement has been in, you know, like Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, all these places. But now we're going to see things happening in like Chicago, Detroit, New York, LA. And that's because of the economic inequality. The Black Panthers are the perfect example of that. Formed in Oakland in California, and their original goal was basically to be like a protective service for African Americans. And then they did a lot of other programs like food drives and healthcare, ambulance drivers. They did Cop Watch and a bunch of other things. Black Power, which is not, it's kind of like a movement within the movement. It's like this it's like this younger group of civil rights activists that are starting to like come of age and get involved into the 1970s and later 60s. And Stokely Carmichael, who was president of SNCC at the time, he's the one who's used that phrase Black Power first. And what he meant was Black empowerment. What he said basically was like, when you talk about equality, when you say Black people need to be equal, what you imply is that they aren't equal, that like white people are here and Black people are here. And when you talk about equality, just the implications of your vocabulary are saying that Black people need to be raised up. And he's saying that that's not true. Like Black people are inherently already equal as human beings. What we need to do is use vocabulary and put things in place that will empower the Black community to receive equal treatment. So it's more about Black empowerment. Well, it's not more about it. That's literally what it is. It's Black empowerment. Not what you would like. I know when you hear white power, you think of like the Klan and white supremacy, because that's what white power is. And that's how that phrase has been used. But Black power just means Black empowerment. Malcolm X, make sure that you're not thinking that he, a lot of times people think like, oh, he's a Black Panther, or he started Black Power, or he's a member of the Black Power movement. That is not true. He definitely would have been, and his beliefs certainly align with those of the Black Power movement, but he was assassinated in 1965 in the spring, and that was really before the Black Power movement like had legs. So and it was definitely before the Black Panthers were even formed, and he had nothing to do with like Oakland or California at all. He was from like Omaha, and then he lived in Detroit, and then lived in New York. So those things are very separate. But in terms of like the more conservative side of the movement, having this like Christian influence and nonviolence, and Dr. King being the face of it, and then the other side of the movement being like Black power, more militancy, Malcolm X definitely fits on that side, which is why a lot of times people think that. But he did not come up, he never used those words. That's not something that he came up with, but he was a Black nationalist. The 6-Day War, I'm not going to ask you about that, but that was just a war between Israel and several other countries in the Middle East that Israel won and gained access. Why did he go to jail? Why did he go to jail? He went to jail for a lot of reasons. He was in and out of jail for a while. I think the long prison sentence that he was serving was for drugs, but he was arrested several times for drugs, prostitution. He was arrested for robbery, I think, once or twice. So he had been arrested several times, but I think the like long sentence that he was serving when he like converted and joined the nation, I believe that was drug related. I think he had been selling. I think that was what that arrest was for. But like I said, 6-Day War, Israel wins, and they gain access, or the ownership essentially, of the Sinai Peninsula, which is where Jerusalem is. And our support of Israel, and the West's support of Israel in that, what exactly is the nation? They're still around. They're kind of interesting. There's a I know there are a few if you're like interested in like different religious groups and stuff like that. I think there's a documentary on the nation on Hulu. I know there's quite a few things about Farrakhan that you can watch. But the nation is essentially a Black nationalist Muslim sect. That's kind of the best way that I can explain it. Like some things I said in the notes were video were like that they believe that white people are Satan. White people are not allowed on property owned by the nation, not allowed in their places of worship at all, which is kind of weird because currently they're starting to align themselves with Scientology and the Church of Scientology, which is overwhelmingly white. But a lot of that has more to do with the fact that Scientology is a money grab. And Farrakhan has sort of those types of habits, money grab habits. And he's currently the leader of the nation. So he's trying, and the Scientology wants more like members of color to take their money. So it's, I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole of like looking up things about the nation. It's pretty weird. Do they directly follow anything from Islam? Yes, they do. They are Muslim, but they're definitely have like a different type of interpretation of some things. It's hard for me to explain because I don't know a lot about the doctrine of the Nation of Islam other than its racial interpretations. I don't know much about their theology, but they are Muslim. I mean, that's why Malcolm X like took his pilgrimage and things like that. So yes, they do consider themselves to be Muslim and follow the Quran and other things. I think there's a show on Hulu called, it might just be called Cults. I don't know. And every episode's like about a different cult. Very good show, by the way, if you're into cults and stuff. But I think they have an episode on the nation. For the record, I'm not saying that the nation is a cult. That is for you to decide. But I think in that show, they have an episode on the nation. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. think it's on Hulu anyway. Stonewall Riots. So that's when I started talking about all those other movements. And so Stonewall will be the start of the gay liberation movement in Greenwich Village in New York. And then we'll see all those other groups form, like the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Newspaper and the Empty Closet and other publications and stuff, and the Vanguard on the West Coast, and then the gay migration into California and the growth of that community in the 1970s in California. So that would mark the beginning, and that's when we'll start to see more states decriminalizing homosexuality, but it won't be decriminalized nationally until 2003. 2003 is when homosexuality was officially and nationally decriminalized. Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, they were the largest anti-war group and anti-draft group and led the anti-war movement pertaining to Vietnam. They started in a college in the Midwest. I can't even remember off the top of my head which school it was, but then they quickly, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And then they eventually, I should know that. I went to App. I should remember Ann Arbor. But eventually they grew to be, nationally and had chapters at every major college and university. And probably one of their larger chapters or largest chapter wasn't even necessarily the one at Michigan, but was actually the one at UCal Berkeley, which became known as the College of Social Movements and Protests. That was what they were really known for. Vietnamization. So this is when Nixon becomes president and he's leading us through Vietnam and his how he's sort of following through on his promises. Remember when he ran for president in 1968, he was like, vote for me. I'm going to get us out of Vietnam. And so when he took office, he started, he instituted the Nixon Doctrine and Vietnamization. The Nixon Doctrine basically said, if you need help, then America's going to help you with our money. And for now, we're going to follow through on all of the current military actions that we're involved in because we have troops all over the world. Vietnam wasn't even the only place that we were focused on at the time. It was just certainly the largest and the most intense. But the Nixon Doctrine was basically we're going to finish this off. But after this, from now on, don't expect America to send you troops to help you. We'll definitely keep sending you military advisors if you need that, and we'll send you money and supplies if you need that. But we're not going to keep sending hundreds of thousands of soldiers into an area to participate in a global conflict that doesn't directly involve us. And that being said, Vietnamization was a part of that, which was Nixon's plan to slowly over time begin withdrawing troops from Vietnam. What we know is that wasn't really happening. He wasn't really withdrawing troops from Vietnam, and he won't really start until the tail end of 1972, after he had already been president for 4 years. And really what he was doing that whole time was expanding the war into the neighboring country of Cambodia, and sending more troops to new locations. Go Nixon. Silent majority, that's the voting group that Nixon targeted so hard. The people who, it's typically, and the silent majority still exists. This wasn't just a Nixon voting group, and they can vote for whoever, and they don't always vote together. It's just, typical trends. Like we saw this past election season, the silent majority overwhelmingly voted for Trump. And that was one of the groups that he was targeting through his campaigns. The silent majority is essentially middle class America, especially middle class white America. And at the time, there was a large amount of silent majority people in the South, and that helped connect Nixon to his Southern strategy, which was swing the entire South for the Republican Party. And it held that way. He was successful. He did swing the whole South for the Republican Party, and it will hold for the Republican Party for decades to come. Things are starting to change, and we're seeing more states go blue and red and be more swing states. We know Florida is always back and forth. North Carolina is a swing state. Virginia as well. So it really just depends now. We're starting to get out of this more regional voting block thing, and we're seeing more of a mix of what's happening, in current. We'll see what happens later this year if we even have elections. Who knows? The My Lai massacre, I don't think I talked about in the notes, but it is in your book, and it's a perfect example of why so many Americans, especially so many veterans of the Vietnam War, were so against the Vietnam War in terms of like how it affected soldiers and mental illness and the amount of, how the nature of combat in Vietnam was so different from the nature of combat in previous wars that we fought. In terms of PTSD, which I don't even know if they had finally coined that official term yet. They might have still been calling it shell shock by this time, but it is PTSD. But it was a Lieutenant, William Calley Jr., who got intel that in this South Vietnamese village called My Lai, that there was that it was like VC headquarters, not necessarily headquarters, but that it was like a VC hotspot. And he was told, go in there, find out who's VC or get the VC and, engage, basically meaning, like wipe them out, kill them, fight them off, remove them, whatever. His unit gets to the village. It's not really any fighters there. It's mostly like elderly people, women and children, and some like fighting capable men. And there was obviously plenty of people within the unit who were like, I think we got bad intel. I don't think that anybody here is VC, so we should just head out. But what we know now to be a triggering experience, because so many times throughout Vietnam, we saw children who were actually VC, women who were VC, elderly who were VC, and use that perception that they were non-threatening to get into locations where American soldiers were and kill people or set off bombs. If you've seen the movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, one of the greatest movies of all time, but there's a scene in the movie where a child walks into a bar where a bunch of soldiers were and sets off a bomb, and the child was VC. So out of fear that these people were VC anyway, William Calley Jr. ordered his men to execute the entire village, and they did. And what we know now is that they probably were not VC. We're willing to bet that none of them were, and that this was a war crime, right? Like all of these women and children and elderly people executed for no reason, and at American hands. And so he was charged with murder and found guilty and, obviously removed from office, and he did go to prison. And I'm sure he didn't receive any mental health treatment because we didn't really have a lot of research on how to treat PTSD or things like that. And, what your body and brain go through when you experience trauma like that before. But, nevertheless, My Lai now is sort of one of those big things that we point to when we look at like wartime trauma and the effects that it can have. My Lai is like the perfect example of all of that. So really sad situation. But like I said, I didn't talk about it in your notes, but it is in your book, so you should know it. Kent State, you watched the video about that the day the 60s died, which was where the National Guard went onto the Kent State campus during their protests and shot and killed 4 students. They had been protesting because of the Cambodia bombing that Nixon had announced after he'd already been doing it for 8 or 9 months. The Pentagon Papers were those papers that were leaked by the New York Times. I almost said the Washington Post, but not the Washington Post, although they were offered the Pentagon Papers and turned them down. They were published by the New York Times, and it was all classified government documents that were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, who worked for the committee that did that report initially, and basically showed all of these war crimes and lies that Kennedy and LBJ had both told not only to the American people through the media, but had also said to Congress in an effort to increase American involvement or justify American involvement in Vietnam. So it exposed, so much government corruption when we were already, seeing trust in the government shattered on a daily basis. The détente with China, that was definitely a big deal. One of the things Nixon's foreign policy certainly known for is he became the first president to take a trip to China, and we began relaxing like tensions and sanctions on them, which was a big deal because they were a communist nation and still are, but they were on, beginning to grow economically speaking. And so Nixon signs this detente, which is essentially like it's not a ceasefire because we're not firing anything. We're not at war with them, but it's sort of like we're gonna relax now, the both of us, in terms of each other. We're not allies, we're not best pals, but we're gonna calm down and not necessarily be constantly like trying to get each other. The Miranda warning, you read about that in other Warren Court cases. There are a lot of Warren Court cases, several that you need to know for the quiz today that you went over in your graphic organizer. So make sure you study that. But Miranda v. Arizona is the case that the book mentions, where that, basically says like you have to be informed of your rights upon arrest. So, if you've watched any episode of Law and Order ever, I'm sure you've heard you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. So that's the Miranda warning that has to be cited to you upon arrest. The Philadelphia Plan I mentioned earlier, that's Nixon's basically version of affirmative action, which is a quota system. And like I said, we don't use that anymore. The EPA, other environmental. I talked about the environmental movement of, after 3 Mile Island and Love Canal, but the environmental legislation that Nixon will sign in the early 70s were definitely like a big time for environmental change. That's when we start having our first Earth Day demonstrations. By the way, Earth Day is in 20 days, April 22nd. So, love your planet, but we're certainly saving a lot of, bad pollutants right now during the pandemic since no one's doing anything. But he will create the EPA, which is basically in charge of enforcing and recommending all of these environmental things. They do investigations into, environmental hazards or things like that. They institute emissions caps, and policies and procedures that companies have to follow when it comes to air pollution, waste disposal, anything like that. That all goes through the EPA, or at least it's supposed to. The Clean Water and Clean Air Acts, and then the Endangered Species Act, all also were Nixon. Southern Strategy, I also mentioned, where Nixon was like trying to swing the whole South for the Republican Party, and it did work. It's why he won It's one of the reasons why he won election, especially by such a large margin in 1972. And then the War Powers Act, which basically undoes that Gulf of Tonkin resolution that they had signed into place for Nixon after not only finding out, not for Nixon, for Johnson, after finding out not only about all of these lies that Kennedy and Johnson had told after the Pentagon Papers were leaked, but also how Nixon also basically lied, not basically, he did lie to Congress and to the American people when he said, I'm pulling troops out of Vietnam and we're ending the war, when really he was authorizing new bombing campaigns and an invasion of Cambodia. So when he came clean about that, Congress was like, we should undo that other thing we did because that's why we got here. So they passed the War Powers Act, which basically says that any type of major military action has to be approved by Congress. Any increase in troops or something like that has to be approved by Congress. So those are all of the bold things in your book for the chapter. Does anybody have any questions? Anything you want me to go back over? Something I didn't go over at all that you have questions about? Anything at all? We feel ready for this quiz? Are we ready for this quiz? Who is on? You don't need to know. I'm not going to ask about Burger. The Vanguards is the, not Vanguards, this is the one, Vanguard, which is the largest gay lib group on the West Coast. And so they'll begin, while Stonewall begins the movement overall, it happens in New York, Vanguard will begin the movement in California. Why is he considered a rhino? Because he supported legislation and actions that would have been traditionally more liberal. The whole environmental movement is a good example. And even his Philadelphia plan is a good example. Instituting, quotas of having to hire minorities is definitely more of a more liberal agenda, and telling companies and restricting companies in terms of their waste emissions and things like that. That's definitely a more liberal agenda. So he is a Republican, was technically a Republican, called himself a Republican, but he supported and instituted a lot more liberal agendas than he did than a regular, like, hardcore Republican probably would have. So that's why he gets the rhino title. Any specific cases we need to know, or just know them all? All the ones on the graphic organizer, I would recommend. Some of them you already know. Some of them will be familiar, like Miranda v. Arizona. And honestly, some of them you probably learned in civics, because I know in civics there's like a long list of cases who had to, what's the word I'm looking for? A long list of cases you had to memorize for the civics exam. So I would focus on the ones that you haven't heard of before. In general, you should just know what the cases do. You don't need to necessarily know a lot of background. I'm not going to ask you like what Miranda was arrested for or anything like that. Who were the militarized gay group? The Gay Liberation Front was the more like militant of the gay lib movement. Did he support civil rights? Who is he, Stephen? Who is he? Is he Nixon? Is he Johnson? Nixon. Not really. Nixon did not really support civil rights. He supported legislation that would gain him voters. Nixon will also, he's going to be very famous for being essentially the start of the war on drugs, right? And so that's going to be, we know, definitely not civil rights. And he's going to contribute to the start of mass incarceration, which disproportionately affects African Americans. So I wouldn't say that Nixon was any type of real supporter of civil rights. I would even probably say that Johnson was more supportive of civil rights than Nixon. And Johnson, all he did was like sign bills into law, not necessarily things that he was like obsessed with, but he was just, looking for voters. So he just did what was popular. Exactly. Yep. He just did what was popular. That's why he stopped busing in the South and things like that. Any other questions? Okay. So good luck on your quiz. As usual, you can text me if you've got any questions while you're taking it. Reminder that you need to make sure you get that work done before any future plans. Nothing specific, nothing serious that I didn't already, say at the beginning of the video. So if you tuned in late, when this is done, go back and rewind and make sure you watch the beginning to catch all of my announcements and stuff. So make sure you're staying in tune with your email this afternoon or tonight. It'll probably be late if I do send out that email about whatever Trevor Packer says about the AP exam. Like I said, if it's nothing specific to our class or like groundbreaking information, then I'm not going to bother sending anything, and you can just read it on College Board's website tomorrow. They might even email it to you. I don't know. how they communicate with you. But if you're curious, you can definitely, wake up in the morning and check the College Board website, and they'll have it all listed there. All right. Well, good luck on all of your work. If you have questions about anything, let me know. And if you have problems with uploading anything, let me know. So I had, a couple people this morning who were struggling with Canvas just like being super glitchy. So if that's happening, and for some reason you can't upload your assignments to Canvas, email them to me. Don't let them be late just because Canvas isn't working. If you've done the work, get the on-time credit and just email it to me and explain, like, I tried to upload this to Canvas, I can't get it to work. And that's no problem. I know that this whole thing is a learning experience for all of us. So I don't mind if you have to email me a couple of things. Good luck.